They did not call it cruelty. They did not call it numbness. They did not even call it strength. But if you stood beside a Stoic during loss, betrayal, humiliation, or sudden chaos, you would feel something unsettling. A calm so deep it felt cold. A silence so controlled it bordered on indifference. And you might ask yourself, how can a philosophy built on virtue, wisdom, and humanity look so emotionally distant? Why did Stoics quietly and deliberately practice what appears to be emotional coldness? To understand this, we must strip away modern assumptions. Today we are taught that emotional expression is health, that vulnerability must always be visible, that feeling deeply is proof of being alive. The Stoics lived in a different world, a brutal world, a world of war, slavery, exile, disease, political executions, and sudden ruin. For them, emotions were not harmless inner experiences. Emotions were forces that could destroy judgment, invite manipulation, and collapse a life overnight. Emotional coldness was not a lack of feeling, it was armor. The Stoics believed that most human suffering does not come from events themselves, but from our judgments about them. This idea sounds comforting until you realize how radical it is. It means grief, rage, envy, panic, humiliation. These are not automatic truths. They are mental reactions. And reactions, if unchecked, turn people into slaves of circumstance. To the Stoic, emotional indulgence was not authenticity. It was surrender. They watched how anger destroyed leaders, how desire corrupted integrity, how fear turned free men into cowards. They saw people weeping not because they had lost something, but because they believed they could not survive without it. So the Stoics made a shocking decision. Instead of letting emotions rule them, they would rule their emotions. And that decision required distance, detachment, a controlled coldness. This coldness was not aimed at others. It was aimed inward. It was a refusal to let the inner world become chaotic simply because the outer world was. When Epictetus was beaten as a slave, he did not scream in rage. He calmly warned his master that his leg would break. When it did, he simply said, "I told you so." This is not apathy. This is mastery. The Stoics distinguish between feelings and passions. Feelings arise naturally. A Stoic would still feel the first sting of loss, the initial wave of fear, the momentary sadness of disappointment. But passions were emotions that overpowered reason, emotions that lingered, spiraled, and demanded obedience. Rage that consumes days, grief that paralyzes years, desire that compromises honor. Emotional coldness was the firewall against passions. They practiced emotional restraint not because they lacked compassion, but because they valued clarity. In moments of crisis, clarity saves lives. A general who panics loses wars. A judge who empathizes blindly loses justice. A ruler who reacts emotionally destroys nations. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in history, wrote privately about reminding himself each morning that he would meet ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful people. This was not cynicism. It was preparation. He was cooling his emotional responses in advance so they could not hijack his decisions. Stoic emotional coldness was strategic. They trained themselves to pause between stimulus and response. In that pause lived freedom. While others reacted, they chose. While others exploded, they evaluated. While others collapsed, they stood. This made them appear distant, even heartless, but it made them effective. Another reason Stoics practiced emotional coldness was because they understood impermanence more deeply than most. Everything they loved, people, status, health, wealth, was already on loan. At any moment, fate could reclaim it. To attach emotionally as if things were permanent was, in their eyes, delusion. So they practiced what feels shocking even today, negative visualization. They imagined losing what they loved. Not to be morbid, but to soften the emotional blow when loss inevitably came. By rehearsing loss emotionally, they reduced future suffering. This practice required emotional distance. You cannot repeatedly imagine loss without cooling your attachment. But the Stoics believed this made love purer, not weaker. You cherish more deeply when you are not possessed by fear of loss. You act more justly when you are not emotionally dependent on outcomes. They also recognized how emotions could be exploited. Flattery manipulates pride. Insults provoke anger. Threats trigger fear. Praise feeds ego. The emotionally reactive person is easy to control. The emotionally cold person is nearly impossible to manipulate. This made Stoicism especially appealing to those in power and those under power: slaves, soldiers, politicians, exiles. Emotional coldness was freedom in hostile environments. Yet this coldness was never meant to erase humanity. Stoics believed in kindness, justice, and duty to others, but they believed compassion should be guided by reason, not drowned in emotion. Pity that weakens judgment helps no one. Rage at injustice without strategy achieves nothing. Tears without action change no outcomes. Consider grief. Stoics did grieve. Marcus Aurelius grieved his children. Seneca grieved friends, but they refused to let grief consume their identity. They believed prolonged grief was not loyalty, it was self-harm. The dead do not benefit from our suffering. The living do. Emotional coldness allowed them to return to duty faster, to continue serving the world despite personal pain. Modern readers often misunderstand this. They imagine Stoics as unfeeling statues, suppressing everything human. In reality, Stoics felt deeply, but briefly. They allowed emotions to pass through them like weather, not take residence. Emotional coldness was not repression. It was non-attachment. There is a crucial difference. Repression pushes emotion down where it rots and resurfaces violently. Stoic detachment observes emotion, names it, questions it, and releases it. This requires discipline. It requires inner strength. It requires a willingness to be misunderstood. Stoics accepted that others might call them cold, distant, or arrogant. They valued inner peace over external approval. To them, being emotionally warm but mentally enslaved was far worse than being emotionally cool but inwardly free. They also understood that constant emotional stimulation weakens the mind. Today we live in a world of outrage cycles, emotional overexposure, and performative feelings. Stoics would see this as dangerous. Emotional coldness was a form of conservation. They rationed emotional energy, spending it only where it mattered. This restraint allowed them to face extreme adversity, exile, poverty, torture, death. When everything external was stripped away, emotional control remained. That control became dignity. And dignity, to a Stoic, was worth more than comfort. They practiced this coldness daily, through journaling, through reflection, through reminding themselves that insults only harm if accepted, that loss only devastates if exaggerated, that fear only controls if obeyed. Over time, this practice reshaped their character. Stoics were not trying to eliminate emotion. They were trying to eliminate emotional tyranny. They wanted to feel without being ruled, to care without clinging, to love without dependency, to act without panic. In a chaotic world, emotional coldness was their way of staying sane. In a cruel world, it was their way of staying just. In an unpredictable world, it was their way of staying free. And perhaps the most uncomfortable truth is this: Stoics did not practice emotional coldness to escape pain, but they practiced it to face pain without breaking. They knew pain was inevitable. Suffering was optional. They chose calm over chaos, reason over reaction, inner stability over emotional fireworks, not because they were less human, but because they wanted to remain human, no matter what fate threw at them. So when you hear that Stoics were emotionally cold, understand what that really means. They were not frozen hearts. They were disciplined minds. And in a world that constantly tries to pull us apart emotionally, that quiet, controlled coldness might be the warmest form of wisdom we have forgotten.